You know, we all learn different ways. Some folks have to touch it, some feel it, some read it, some just listen, some watch. But you know, when you have someone who takes a real interest in you and decides to help you learn something, it sure seems to make the lesson take a little better. Here's a story about that. Did you ever see an engineered design that made you ask, what were they thinking? I don't know. We're gonna try it. Here goes nothing. Huh, let me go turn my air on. Well, the air's on. Don't know what it's done. Well, let me go check that out. Maybe I have it shut off somewhere else. Okay, let's try this again. Found out that the air regulator was set for my air sprayer, and it takes a lot less volume from a painter, and it takes a lot less volume than does my impactor. So I'll see if I can find a place to set you. And I'll go ahead and zip that out of there. I can get it on there. Let's see. It doesn't want to go down on there. That's a really great design. Now, yep. Let me try something different. All right, so I guess we're going to have to put the socket in and get it on the nut first. All right. Then stick the shaft in, extension on, all right. And let me hit it there. Got it. Oh, there's a stump jumper up here. That hole there has a keyway in it. Should be able to see it right there. The bolt that comes out of it has a key on it too. Right there. See that key? Okay.
That's a shoulder bolt. So with the washer, it's got a little thin washer on there that kind of keeps tension on that blade. I'll have to pound it out flat. But you can see the shoulder right down in here that holds the blade. So the shoulder locks in tight right around here. The key fits in that keyway and keeps the bolt from turning as you tighten the nut. On the top, up here, is a flat washer, and then the nut fits on that. If they just put that hole in the right way, this job would be really, really easy. But we got it. So now, let's take a look at them blades. I'm going to say that that blade was just about through the break-in period. You could use just a little bit of sharpening. You always want to stack your blades. See how they line up. And make sure that they're not bent. And they're not. They line up pretty good. So both of them about in the same shape along here. Probably could use just a little bit of tender love and care. I think I'll hit those a little bit with the grinder and get a nice edge on them. Okay, first the disclaimer. This is not gonna be a lesson on how to sharpen brush cutter blades. It's just gonna show you how I do it. I've told a piece of this story before, but this might be a good time to share it again. I don't have credentials as a lawnmower blade sharpener. But when I was 14 years old, my dad and I put in a chain link fence for a fella who lived in town. Okay? He had a yard that could have been in better homes and gardens. He was always planting stuff. I mean, there wasn't a flower on this earth that grew in this area, and some that didn't. He didn't have in that yard. He had a garden, flower beds, had an irrigation system, such as it was in about 1966, I think it was. Ought to be about right. My dad and I put in a chain link fence. You see, we had a dairy farm and we were always broke, never had any money. So I got old enough that we could start working together. So we started in the summertime. We're putting in chain link fences. We happened to put in a chain link fence for a fella that had that yard I was telling you about. And he had a young fella working for him who was a couple years older than me. And he called him his yardner. And even though he lived across the alley, he had a little bit of trouble showing up to work on time. And once he got there, he had a lot of reasons why it was that he needed to go back home or take a break. He'd get about half the yard mowed in 4 hours. So my dad and I were putting that fence in, and he noticed that I was digging those holes and mixing that concrete in a wheelbarrow, and pouring it around, all those chain link posts. We did one Saturday, we did a whole fence line. Got every post in it. Came back on Sunday afternoon. We put the top rail on it, cut all the posts off, put the top rail on it, perfectly straight, perfectly level. Stretched the fence, tied it all up, and set the next, dug holes for the next shorter section of fence there. So when we came back on Monday to put the rest of that fence in, he asked me, would you like to come to work for me? And my dad said, well, he has to milk cows, but if he wants to come over after school, let's see if we can have the bus drop him off here. So I did. I started working for him. He paid $1.25 an hour. Didn't matter if it was Saturday or Wednesday, $1.25 an hour. And I'd go by there and I'd work at his house for a couple hours after school, because I had to be home by 7 to milk. All day Saturday, of course, I could get in there about 8 o'clock in the morning and work till about 6. But anyway, he taught me a lot of things about life I didn't know. Didn't have to teach me how to work because I grew up on a farm, but he had to teach me how to do quality work, fine work, paying attention, all the little details. I think that's the reason why I went into a career in quality assurance, was because of the fact that I was just a little bit more particular about how work was done than most folks my age. But at any rate, back to the lawnmower blades. He had 2 lawnmowers, 2 lawn boys, 22-inch cut, same, brand new, bought together, bought new ones every 2 years. And they had baggers on them, but they were side baggers. So the lawnmowers, you couldn't fill the bag full, because then the mower would tilt to the weight of the bag. So you could only get a half a bag. But we always used those bags, always picked up that grass when we were mowing. Okay. But the other thing he was particular about was pattern. He had several patterns that we would use. And we had a list, and every time we mowed that pattern, we'd cross it off the list. The next time we'd do the next pattern. We had diagonal that started in the northeast corner, diagonals that started in the northwest corner. We had verticals that were parallel lines. We had verticals that were checkerboards with horizontals. That one took 2 people pushing a mower, because one had to cross over the other one whenever you mowed. And there's even one that was kind of a sinuous move around a row of trees and bushes that ran up through a diagonal that he had on his property. But the thing that he was most particular about was he wanted that grass to have sharp, smooth, dead even cuts across the top. So he wanted them blades sharp. That's a pretty one. Cut it. Saw against the edge, not against. There you go, neighbor. I'll close it for you, Laney, in just a minute.
I keep thinking like I get to keep the tape because you hand it over to me.
All right. Now you girls, There's your butterfly nap. What I like.
Thanks.
Sure. It ain't even worth a hug.
Yay.
Oh
my God.
Mm.
Grown-ups are pretty tough to do it.
Huh?
Grown-ups are pretty tough for me to do it.
To do what? Hug?
This.
Oh, yeah.
For them to go like this.
Okay. Thanks, girl. All right, here you go. Well, in order to get that perfect cut on that grass, those lawnmower blades had to be sharp. In addition to all the other stuff, you had to push at the right speed. Yet, like I already mentioned, that you had to keep the bag so that it didn't cause the mower to tilt. Empty it about half full. But what he had 2 sets of blades for that mower, for those mowers. And he had a bench grinder sitting right there on a bench in his shop. We weren't allowed to use it. He insisted that we file them. Now, I think I mentioned to you that he had another fellow that worked for him, who's a little older than me. We were both yardners, equal rank, equal pay. But he hated filing them blades, and I kind of liked it. First time I tried it, the fella who we worked for came out there and showed me a little bit about filing and turned me loose. And I had that blade sharp enough you could slice bread with it. He came out and he said, "That'll never do." I was so proud of myself. I mean, I could almost take hair off my arm if I'd had any back then. So he said, "Saturday, you're going to spend the day at the lawnmower shop. Be prepared to learn." So, come Saturday, I came into his house, got there, I don't know, 8 o'clock. He took me right over to the local lawnmower repair shop. It was like a third generation of people, old shop. Was on a corner in town, and everybody in town took their lawnmowers there. Anybody that wanted a really good mower bought them from him. He knew everything there was to know about lawnmowers. And somehow, my boss had arranged for him to spend a day teaching me how to sharpen lawnmower blades with a file. He set me up with a little vise, gave me a couple of really, really bad lawnmower blades, and he taught me what the difference was between a smooth mill bastard and a regular roughing file. Every stroke there is to know. How do you file with the grain? How do you file against the grain? How do you draw a file? How do you polish with a file? And mainly, he taught me how to file it so it was exactly flat. So I got to where I was handling the file pretty good. And he comes in there and he says, "I want to see a dime's worth of glint on the front of the blade. That edge right there, I want you to file it down to where it's as thick as a dime and no more. Thought he was crazy. I mean, a dime? You can't cut anything with a dime. But I did as I was told, and I worked on it and worked on it. He came back about, I don't know, hour and a half. That's the deer feeder going off in the background. An hour and a half or so later, took a look at him. He said, "That's pretty good." He said, "I've got some more for you," and he dropped about a half a dozen more down there. I thought, well, I'm getting paid $1.25 an hour. He said, "Before you get started on these, I want to show you something." He walked over and he picked up a blade, been brought into him. And some guy had filed it himself on a grinder. You could still see the blue in the steel where he'd burned it. But mostly what you could see was that edge was all chipped and broken, and what parts of it weren't chipped and broken were burred over. Mostly bent down, some of them bent up. And he started to explain it to me. He said, a lawnmower blade tip travels at about 100 miles an hour. And he said, something about the thickness of a dime will slice through that grass clean every time. He said, what you want is you want to make sure you have the front edge of that blade tough enough that they can hit sticks, maybe even some small rocks, and it don't chip and it don't burr. And he showed me along that blade just exactly what he was talking about. And he walked over and he picked up a blade that he'd sharpened, and he sharpened it with a file. And he said, I consider this to be a very good blade. I looked at it and there were a couple nicks along the edge of it. I didn't say anything, you know, he's the expert. But I guess my expression gave me away, and he kind of figured out I wasn't buying what it was that he was selling. So he points to one of those little divots in the edge, and he said, looks like they hit a rock here. And I said, yeah, or a stick. And he said, I sharpened this blade before. That wasn't a stick. That had to be a rock. And I said, how come you didn't file it out? He said, well, son, I'll tell you, I'm in the business of fixing lawnmowers, and I fix a lot of them. Along the way, I sharpen a few blades. People come in here, buy the mowers from me, I take care of them. When they need to have their blades sharpened, I sharpen their blades. And they always go home and they always cut really, really good. He said, sometimes people complain that they look at that blade and they see a little dip in the end there, and they think I didn't even sharpen it or didn't do a good enough job. I tell them, well, if I sharpen that out, your blade is going to die a little more. It's going to get used up, worn out. If every time you bring it in here and you've got a little nick in that edge and you want me to sharpen it till that nick is gone, then I'm going to be selling you a lot of blades. And I'm not in the business of selling lawnmower blades. I'm in the business of selling lawnmowers, servicing them, and sharpening blades. And I'll guarantee you that blade will cut. But if you want to have a nice straight clean edge on that, I'm going to tell you that I'll sell you a brand new blade and it won't have a nick in it. That's just the way it was. So ever since then, my philosophy's been that when I sharpen a lawnmower blade, as small a thing as it is, I sharpen them just like he taught me. Except now, I've graduated to a grinder. When you get to bigger equipment, I've learned on my own that dime thickness don't get it. You got to be up there about the thickness of a quarter and a dime. That seems to be about right for the size of brush cutter that I run. I don't know what it would be for a forestry cutter. Haven't ever tried one. But I do know that it works great for me. What I like to do, or the way I like to do it, is I like to take the back of the blade and get rid of all the burrs along that edge first. Okay? Doesn't take long. Okay? Once that's gone, whoop, wrong vise. I got a vise and a vise here. Okay?
What are you doing?
Sharpening a blade. What are you doing? Huh? I'm going to go along here. I'm going to knock off the high spots. Not going to try to get it perfectly smooth, because if I do that, I'll lose a good deal of the blade. But that allows me to have some sort of a line that I can watch from the top side as I start to grind on it. If you look right down along that edge, if I can get the light just right,
you'll see that it's a little thick in here. And back in here, it's about right. What I want is I went between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch, and that's a little over 1/8. So I need to do some more work right out in here on this part. That corner's got a chip missing underneath it, okay? So I need to take a little more out in here and kind of bring this down. I don't need to do any grinding back in this area. So, a little more grinding. Turning it up this time so that I can look down that edge and see what I'm getting. Yes, you may. You notice that right along in here, it starts to turn a little bit of color as I'm grinding it. That's because it's starting to get warm.
What are you making?
I am sharpening blades off of the brush cutter.
Oh.
And so, I really need to let that cool. So, while that's cooling, I'll work on the other blade. Then I'll come back and put the finish edge on this one.
So I don't grind all the nicks out. I don't grind them to a sharp point. And every year I pull them off and I hit them again. And when it gets to that outside corner, is worn down to the point that it won't sharpen anymore, well, that shortens the blade. So I replace it. Right or wrong, I don't know. But I was taught by a pro. So I guess you could say my registration, certification, understanding is that I was taught by one of the best in the business. Did I learn it all? Nah. Did I learn a little? I think so. Appreciate you watching. This is the house where I had my first job. Started in 14 as a yardner. Okay. Nice house. And just to let you know how it turned out, my dad and I built chain link fence here. And aside from where the limb fell down on it and bent it, that fence still just as strong as it ever was.
I really appreciate you stopping by. If you don't mind, would you go ahead and poke that like button? Thank you.